Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. The crowd was small but fierce. A group of rebels in their own right clustered together under the dim streetlights of a crumbling city. Alexander Lee stood before them, his voice rising above the wind that swept through the hollow alleyways, carrying with it the scent of decay that clung to the city for too long. The truth will be revealed, Alexander said, his voice firm but warm. He had been fighting this fight for years, and every day felt like a losing battle. This regime has thrived on secrecy, on manipulation, on holding on to power for lifetime. But the time has come for us to expose them for what they really are. His words struck a chord with the audience. A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd, but there was fear in their eyes. The Communist Party had ruled with an iron fist for more than a century, using technology so advanced it bordered on the mystical. Whispers of life extension technology had circulated in underground circles, but nothing had ever been proven until now. Dr. Mia Vahatio, standing behind Alexander, pulled her coat tighter around her slender frame. She had once been a key scientist in the government, the Life Extension Project, a project that had gone far beyond what the public could imagine. She knew the technology intimately, knew how it worked, and more importantly, how it was used to control the highest echelons of the party. As the crowd dispersed, wary of attracting too much attention from the ever-present surveillance drones, Mina stepped forward. "They'll come for us. You want to be able to hide once this information gets out," she warned Alexander quietly, her eyes scanning the darkened horizon as if she could sense the invisible threat looming. "They've then been coming for me since the moment I stood against them," Alexander replied, his tone resolute. "But this is bigger than us. The people deserve to know." Mia handed him a small data chip. It was innocuous enough to pass through checkpoints undetected, but it held the key to unraveling the party's darkest secret. Alexander looked at it, knowing that with this, he was holding the regime-sent downfall in his hand. He had a choice to make go public with the evidence and risk everything or continue the fight from the shadows. Once he released this, I continued, her voice low, "There's no turning back." Alexander didn't hesitate. There never was. The decision had been made tomorrow. During the nationally broadcast political debate between him and Chairman Fang, the truth would come to light. The next day, the atmosphere was tense. Across the city, massive holographic billboards broadcasted the debate, and people gathered in squares, bars, and living rooms to watch the showdown. Alexander stood in a quiet room backstage, pacing. Elena Chang, his campaign strategist and the sharpest mind in his team, approached him. "We've only got one shot at this," she reminded him, her voice steady, though the weight of their mission hung heavy between them. "Once you confront Feng, we need to be ready to go live with the data. If we don't act fast, the party will shut it down before the public sees it." Alexander stopped pacing and faced her. "Is everything ready on your end?" Elena nodded. "The hackers are in place. We've got journalists ready to spread the story through every underground channel we can find. Even if they cut us off, the truth will get out." But she paused, glancing at me, I who stood in the corner, her expression grim. "We might not all make it out of this alive." I's eyes met Alexander S. She had known this moment was inevitable from the day she defected. "The party doesn't forgive betrayal, but I've made my choice." They all had the risk of death was real, but it was a risk worth taking. The debate was held in the heart of the capital, a sprawling futuristic building that loomed over the rest of the city. Inside, the air was thick with anticipation as the audience, comprised of government officials, loyalists, and select citizens, took their seat. The party's grip on the media was evident in the carefully curated crowd. Everyone present was either a known supporter or too afraid to resist. Alexander Sanders stood at his podium facing Chairman Fang, the man who had ruled the nation for more than a century. Fang's appearance was startling. He looked no older than 50, his face unlined, his eyes sharp and calculating. The rumors about his immortality, once dismissed as conspiracy theories, seemed more real than ever as Alexander studied him up close. Fang's voice was calm and controlled, but beneath the surface, there was an unmistakable aura of arrogance. "You claim to stand for the people, Mr. Liu, yet all you offer is chaos and rebellion. The Communist Party has brought stability, progress, and peace to this nation. What you offer is nothing more than a return to the dark days of unrest." Alexander Dan knew this moment was pivotal. The crowd, the nation, the world was watching. He took a breath, steeling himself. What I offer. He began, his voice steady, is the truth. A murmur went through the crowd, but Fen remained composed. The truth, you say? And what truth is that? The truth, Alexander said, is that the Communist Party has held onto power for over a century through technology that should never have existed. Life extension technology used by the party is elite to keep themselves in power indefinitely, while the rest of the country suffers under their tyranny. There was a sharp intake of breath from the audience. Fenny's eyes narrowed and a cold smile tugged at his lip. These are dangerous accusations, Mr. Lika, unfounded and frankly absurd. Alexander didn't waver. He glanced at Elena, who gave him a subtle nod from the audience. It was time. I have proof, he declared. Dr. Maibara Fata, a former scientist for the regime, has provided irrefutable evidence of the party's use of life extension technology. And right now, my team is broadcasting that evidence to the entire nation. Chairman Fan's composure cracked for the first time. He signaled to his security, but it was too late. Across the nation, the broadcast was hijacked, screens flickered, and the pre-recorded testimony of Dr. Iva Hara appeared. Her voice, calm but filled with regret, echoed through every public space. For decades, I worked on a secret project to develop life extension technology for the Communist Party. She said, her face illuminated on the screen. What started as a scientific endeavor to extend human life became a tool of control used by the party as elite to remain in power, unchallenged and unaged, while the rest of the population is kept in the dark. The reaction was immediate in the streets. People stopped in their tracks, staring at the screens in disbelief. The truth had been laid bare, and the air was electric with the possibility of rebellion. In the debate hall, chaos erupted. Fenian security forces moved in, but Alexander's supporters were ready. Protesters outside surged forward, clashing with police, and the hall itself became a battleground. Amid the chaos, Alexander rocked eyes with Fenby. This is the end of your reign, he said quietly, but with steel in his voice. Fang's expression hardened. You have no idea what you've had done. Outside, the city was on fire, both metaphorically and literally. The protests that had started as small, isolated pockets of resistance had exploded into full-blown riot. People who had once feared the party, signed power, were now emboldened by the revelation, willing to fight for their freedom. Elena coordinated from a hidden command center, monitoring the situation. We were losing control, she muttered, watching the screens as police and military forces began to crack down on the protesters with brutal efficiency. Letiguri, a loyalist embedded in Alexander San's campaign, watched the chaos unfold. He had been sent by the party to infiltrate the opposition, but as the days had gone by, he found himself questioning his mission. He had seen the corruption, the abuse of power, but more than that, he had seen the hope in the eyes of people who wanted change. Now, watching the regime crush its own citizens, Lun knew he had a choice to make. He could continue to serve the party, or he could join the fight for something better. With a deep breath, he made his decision. Lagway moved quickly through the chaos, weaving between protesters and riot police, the air thick with the acrid smell of tear gas. His heart pounded in his chest as he weighed his next move. He had been loyal to the party for as long as he could remember. But the truth, the ugly, undeniable truth, had shattered his conviction. He couldn't unsee the corruption, the manipulation, the centuries-long control of power that had oppressed the people. The party had promised stability, but it had given them a dictatorship masquerading as peace. His orders had been clear. Infiltrate Alexander Ryuichi campaign, gain their trust, and report back on their every move. But now, as he stood at the crossroads of loyalty and morality, he realized that his orders were irrelevant. He could no longer serve a regime built on lies. He pulled out his communicator, hesitating for only a second before activating a secure line to Alexander's team. Alina's voice crackled through. Who is this? I am switching side. There was a brief silence on the other end, then Alina's sharp voice cut through. We don't have time for games? No games. I have intel on the party CO, plans to suppress the uprising, let me help. There was another pause, but shorter this time. Meet me at the safe house on Exing Road. You'd better be telling the truth. We shoved the communicator into his pocket and began moving toward the safe house, aware that he was now a target for both sides. He had just made himself a traitor to the party, but for the first time in his life, he felt a glimmer of something he hadn't felt in years, hope. Inside the debate hall, Alexander and Chairman Feng stood locked in a tense stare-off as security personnel scrambled around them. Feng's expression had turned cold, the mask of calm shattered. His fingers twitched at his side, a subtle signal to his personal guards to close in. "You've started a war you can win," Feng said in a low, venomous tone. "Do you really think exposing this will bring the regime down? We are the foundation of this country. Without us, there is only chaos." Alexander's gaze was steady, but he could feel the weight of the situation bearing down on him. "The people have lived in your chaos for over a century now. They were fighting for a chance at real freedom." Feng gave a small, chilling smile. "Freedom. The people don't want freedom. They want order, and we provide that you will see soon enough." With a swift motion, Feng's guards moved to grab Alexander, but he was ready. He ducked to the side, avoiding the first guard's outstretched hand, then slammed his fist into the man's side. A second guard lunged at him, but Alexander used the podium as leverage to flip the man onto the ground. The hall was erupting into violence as party loyalists clashed with Alexander's supporters. The camera feeds went dark, cut off by the party's control, but the damage had already been done. Across the nation, the truth was out. Alexander knew he couldn't stay here. He needed to regroup with Alina and the other. He darted toward the exit, dodging the chaos unfolding around him. His mind raced. They had managed to release the information, but now they had to survive long enough to make sure the uprising didn't get crushed before it had a chance to gain momentum. Alina paced inside the safe house, her fingers tapping rhythmically against the wooden table as she awaited the Sci arrival. She didn't trust him, not fully, but desperation had a way of making unlikely alliances. If what Li said was true, they would need every advantage they could get. The door creaked open, and Ling Wei stepped inside, his face pale but resolute. Alina's eyes narrowed. "The party is mobilizing its elite strike force," Li said without preamble. "They were planning to lock down the city within the hour, using military force if necessary. They framed the protesters as violent extremists, shut down communication networks, and cut off any outside influence." "Sounds about right," Alina muttered. She glanced at her map of the city spread across the table. "Where are they deploying first?" "Main government district and the industrial sectors. They were going to cut off supply routes and trap the protesters in isolated area." Alina surmised word as she processed the information. "We need to move fast. Alexander is still out there, and we need to get him back here before they tighten the noose." Later added, stepping closer to the map, "We can use the underground tunnels to avoid the main streets. They were old, but they should still be intact." For a moment, Alina studied him, trying to gauge his sincerity. Then with a curt nod, she turned to the rest of her team. "Get the word out. We remove it." The streets were chaos, and Alexander Dan knew they didn't have much time. He moved swiftly through the back alleys, his mind focused on reaching the safe house. The city's sassy presence of police drones and armored vehicles patrolling the streets made it clear that the party was already moving to crush the resistance. Suddenly, he spotted a group of protesters being cornered by a squad of heavily armed security forces. Their batons and shields gleamed under the harsh streetlights as they pushed the protesters back. The air was thick with tension, and Alexander could see that the protesters, mostly young and unarmed, were no match for the party's enforcers. Without thinking, Alexander charged toward the confrontation. He couldn't stand by and watch as more innocent lives were snuffed out by the regime's brutality. He grabbed a discarded piece of wood from the ground and swung it hard at one of the officers. The guard staggered back, momentarily stunned, and Alexander used the opportunity to rally the protesters. "Move." Now he shouted, directing them toward a nearby alley. They hesitated for a second, but then the group surged forward, breaking past the security forces. Alexander remained at the rear, holding off the guards long enough for the protesters to escape. Once they were clear, he turned and bolted down another alley, knowing the party's reinforcements would soon arrive. His muscles ached from the effort, and his breath came in ragged gasps, but he pushed forward. He was so close. Ledwee, Alina, and the others were waiting when Alexander finally burst through the door of the safe house. His clothes were torn, and his face was smeared with dirt and sweat, but his eyes were alight with determination. "We need to move fast," Alexander Sanders said, barely pausing to catch his breath. "The party's all gonna lock down the city any minute now." As I stepped forward, holding out a tablet with real-time update. "I've got the military deployment plan. If we coordinate, we can get key groups of protesters into safe zones before the party can trap them. Alexander looked at him, surprised by the sudden change in allegiance. He had known Lipui as a loyalist, a man who had worked for the regime for years, but now, standing in the dim light of the safe house, he seemed like a different man, one who had made a choice to fight for the right side. "We don't have much time," Elena said, cutting through the moment. "The military is already moving on the industrial district. If we don't get there in the next 20 minutes, it's gonna be a bloodbath." Alexander nodded. "Let's say go." As the night deepened, the battle for the city raged on. Protesters clashed with party loyalists in the streets, while the military moved to crush the uprising with brute force. But thanks to Lucia and Elena's strategy, key groups of resistance fighters managed to slip through the cracks, regrouping in safe zones where they could continue their fight. The regime was losing its grip for the first time in a century. The people had a real chance at freedom. But Chairman Fan wasn't going to let that happen without a fight. From his command center in the heart of the capital, Fan watched the chaos unfold on his screen. His face was tight with anger, his youthful features betraying the centuries of power he had accumulated. He had underestimated Alexander Valley, and now the entire nation was on the verge of rebellion. "We can still regain control," one of his generals said, standing stiffly by his side. "Deploy the strike teams to the key sectors. If we eliminate Liu and his leadership, the resistance will crumble." Fang nodded slowly, his eyes narrowing as he watched the map of the city, red dots representing the protesters, spreading like wildfire. "Do it." It was nearly dawn when the strike teams arrived at the safe house. They moved silently and swiftly, breaking through the outer defenses before anyone had time to react. Alexander, Elena, and Lexa were in the middle of a planning session when the door was blown off its hinges. The fight was brutal and fast. The strike team was well trained, heavily armed, and ruthless. But the resistance fighters were desperate, driven by a fierce need to survive and protect the fragile hope they had sparked. Amid the chaos, Alexander found himself facing one of the strike team cell leaders, a man twice his size and armed with a combat knife. The man lunged, but Alexander dodged, grabbing a broken chair leg and using it to block the next strike. The two grappled, the sounds of gunfire and screams filling the air around them. In the corner of the room, Elena and Leif fought side by side, holding off the soldiers as best they could. But it was clear they were outnumbered. The strike team was overwhelming them, and the resistance defenses were crumbling. Suddenly, a shot rang out, and the strike team leader crumpled to the ground, a bullet hole in his chest. Alexander spun around to see Leif holding a smoking gun in his hand, his expression grim but determined. "We have to go," Leif said, his voice urgent. "Now." Without another word, the three of them bolted for the back exit, slipping out into the pre-dawn darkness as the safe house fell behind them. The sun was rising over the city as they regrouped in a hidden bunker outside the capital. The battle was far from over, but the resistance had survived the night. For now, that was enough. Alexander stood outside, watching as the first rays of light touched the horizon. The city was still burning in the distance, but there was a sense of hope in the air, hope that the regime's stranglehold on power was finally weakening. Elena joined him, her face tired but resolute. "We've bought ourselves some time," she said, "but the party won't stop. They'll come for us again." "I know," Alexander replied softly, "but the people have seen the truth now. They want to go back to living under the party's light." Like stepped out of the bunker, joining them in the early morning light. He had risked everything to help the resistance, and now there was no turning back. For the first time in his life, he felt free.